This is like a tradition that's starting now. Every time I interview someone, I have to throw a book.
Tradition.
Yes. It's
Tradition.
Hello, everyone. It's Jess Adele, and I'm here with Justin today, and we're going to talk about Marvel's Spider-Man. I am so excited about this game. I haven't played a Spider-Man game since Spider-Man 2, which was amazing. I mean, I dabbled with other stuff, but it just wasn't good, so I didn't bother with it.
Yeah.
Justin actually did a review of the game already, and I watched it. It was amazing. I actually haven't played the game still, so I lived through that a little bit. It looked awesome.
It was awesome. I had a great time playing through it.
I'm super jealous.
Honestly, I've been super hyped for this game ever since it was announced. I was waiting with bated breath for every trailer that came out, every new piece of information. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And when I finally did, it was everything that I thought it was going to be, with some exceptions. I mean, the gameplay really was what was promised. The combat is super fluid and super fun. The web swinging feels amazing. It's intuitive and fun, and the animations are super clean, so it always feels like you're moving as Spider-Man. It's never awkward and janky like it was in previous games.
Exactly. It's great they finally managed to do this again.
Yeah.
Like, how did it take so long? I don't understand.
That's the thing. And like, for anyone who's played like another Spider-Man game, like Ultimate Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2, there was always like that element of, man, if they nailed this, if they really got this down, this could be one of the greatest games ever.
Exactly.
And they're so close. Like, there are little missing pieces to the total package of what this game is that would make it like this total masterpiece. But what we have right now is the best Spider-Man game I've ever played. Yeah, for sure. I feel like the way that they've taken stuff from the Arkham series, especially the combat, and changed it up to make it in Spider-Man's world, just, it was a brilliant choice. And yes, the Arkham series has to happen for this game to happen, but it's not derivative or a copy because it brings its own spin to it.
That's good. Yeah.
Hey, spin, that's a pun.
Let's just swing right out of that one into a little more talk about the story.
Let's do it.
What can you tell us about it?
So basically, they brought in real Spider-Man writers, which I think was a good choice just because sometimes it's good to have people in the room that actually understand the characters, especially when you're dealing with a character that has as much backstory and history as Spider-Man.
Yeah, you can't mess this one up. You really can't mess around
People
with
can tell when it's like, this guy doesn't know Spider-Man. And they brought in specifically Dan Slott, who's written more Spider-Man stories than anyone in history, which is saying a lot because a lot of people have written for that character.
Yeah.
And you can really feel his influence on the game and on the story. Like, it really feels like his version of Peter Parker, which is a very modern version because he was writing on the series until very recently. And I like that because it kind of provides people who maybe don't read the comics with a different version of Peter than we've seen in the past. He's kind of more standoffish and a little bit more confident than maybe we've seen, where he's like more meek in the movies, especially the Tom Holland movies. He's kind of like still very young and still learning his powers. And they made the choice to bring this game into the world at like a later part of Spider-Man's history. He's 8 years in, he's like used to it. This was a big part of their PR like push. This is a veteran Spider-Man.
Yeah, I was really surprised to hear about that choice.
But where it kind of falls apart for me a little bit with that choice, not falls apart, but I had a hard time, it's a tough pill to swallow, is that there are villains that Spider-Man's never fought, key villains, one of which is in the game, one of which is teased heavily, but they don't really get into it. And they're essential villains that it's like, it feels weird to me that 8 years in, Spider-Man hasn't heard of these guys yet.
Okay, he hasn't heard of them at all.
No, they haven't even.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was
I don't want to
like,
get into spoilers.
It happened already. No, okay.
So to me, that seems
spoiler-free.
Like a misstep, only because those villains like define in a lot of ways Spider-Man's history. If you go back in the comics, anyone who's played the game knows what I'm talking about. If you go back in the comics, you know that these villains have had like a tremendous impact on Spider-Man's life. So for him to go 8 years without ever facing off against them, as a Spider-Man fan, that's something I bumped into a little bit.
Yeah, like if it's who I'm thinking of, then that's kind of odd.
It's definitely who you're thinking of. But ultimately, they did that for a reason. One of them plays a major role, the ultimate role in this game, Ultimate Spider-Man. And I think it pays off. It delivers a really interesting story in and of itself. But at the beginning, I did bump into that a little bit. I was like, I don't know where they're going with this, but it turned out to be okay.
So I've heard that there are certain sections in the game where you actually play as other characters.
Yeah.
Please tell me about this.
So the game is broken up with little sections where they're basically stealth missions where you play as either Mary Jane or Miles Morales, who has an interesting role in this game. I don't want to get too into it because spoilers, obviously. But basically, you're taken away from the main Spider-Man story, and you get like the side perspective of like the secondary characters, and they're different. The way that MJ's levels play out are different than Miles's, but they're both basically the same thing. You're creeping around, you're trying not to get caught.
And not that they have a choice anyway. They're just regular humans.
You can't get caught. You're done if you get caught. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with these sections. They're well made. They're perfectly fun in and of themselves, but they're not being Spider-Man. Which they did such a good job of making fighting people and swinging around as Spider-Man as fun as it possibly could be, that whenever you're playing this game and you're not doing that, you're like, why am I not doing that?
Exactly. That's why I only heard about it when I watched your review. So I was like, what? Seriously? Like, the game is called Spider-Man. Like, no one cares about anybody else. You want to play as Spider-Man in Spider-Man.
And if it was like 1 or 2 times, I would be like, yeah, it's fine. They're giving it some variety. There's like quite a few missions where you're taken away from being Spider-Man. And it's like, I just want to web dudes up. That's all I want to do.
That's what I'm here for.
There are also these like hacking puzzles and matching line puzzles, and it's like, I see what they're doing. They're trying to provide a little bit of variety. They don't want you to feel like you're always doing the same thing. But ultimately, they should have found a way to do that was as exhilarating and as fun as being Spider-Man, because whenever you're not doing that, you really notice it. You really notice that, okay, we're in a lull right now. We're not zipping around the city and punching dudes in the face.
Which is what we're here for.
Which is what we're here for.
All right, so let's go to the community tab. Jesus. Hit the wall. Okay, anyway, community tab. Let's just check out what you guys have to say, what questions you want to ask us about this. So, XXX Ender 111XXX says, hey, I'm first, surprisingly.
Good for you, man.
Oh, and then we have We Are Saiyans, who says, no, I was first.
Conflict.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to just go to the comment section of your review video.
Let's do it.
Let's just, give me a second.
So, user by the name of Biology, which is a great name,
That's a pretty good name,
says, I didn't find the enemy variety to be lacking at all. They introduced new enemy types right up until the end of the game. My issue with the enemy variety was that basically they were differentiated by the weapons that they held, and then that was carried over to the different types of enemies. So like you have your demons who are not actually demons, don't worry.
Okay,
you have your escaped prison convicts, and you have like Fisk's men and the Sable soldiers, and they sound really different, right? But ultimately they're more or less the same. They're just holding different variations on the same weapons, which I found kind of frustrating, only because the interesting part of the combat is when you're fighting different types of enemies, you have to approach each one differently. Like the guy who holds a knife, you can't just punch him, he's gonna block it, so you gotta punch him into the air first. The big old bulky dude, you gotta web him up before you start punching him, because he's gonna block your punches if you try and hit him before that. Then having to deal with all those things at once makes the game kind of difficult. The only problem is, once those things are introduced, they just carry over to every different type of faction in the game.
So once you figure out all the little things, you're like, okay, well, this is just a different group, but it's the same deal.
Right, it's ultimately the same deal. I would have liked to see a little bit more differentiation and diversity between the different factions, just so that when I'm fighting Fisk's men versus the other inmates, it felt a little bit different. The one that really stands out to me is the demons, but you fight a lot of them in this game. Like a good chunk of the game is fighting against one faction, which I found a little disappointing.
Yeah, they knew it was good, so they're like, I'll just keep using it.
Take a lot of this. So Kurt Randall says, I will play it for sure. I'm mostly interested in the web slinging and story though, but is it about time for games stop being just another Batman Arkham inspired game? Is that style of combat still considered to be so innovative nearly 10 years later? That's a really good comment, and I'd like to say that the game does a really good job of being inspired by the Batman games, but adding that level of Spider-Man flair that it's different. You will feel like, oh, these are familiar elements. You gotta hit that counter button a lot. You gotta make sure that you're dodging as much as you possibly can. But ultimately, they changed it enough and they made it fun enough in its own unique way that it does feel innovative, it does feel different. So I do see the concern of like, hey, that looks like the same thing I've been doing in those 4 Batman games. It's different enough that you can see how they were inspired, but how they decided to change it and make it new and make it fresh. And they definitely did that.
Yeah, and even Spider-Man 2 has some of those elements still, and that's before that series ever happened. So who's inspiring who?
That's true. That's fair. So Zach Erickson says, I thought the parts of the game where you play as MJ or Miles were fun and engaging. I don't disagree. I just think that the parts where you're playing as Spider-Man were more fun and engaging, and I wanted to be doing that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong inherently with those levels. It's just everything else is just so much more fun than that I just wanted to be doing more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I get to be a normal person and sneak around any day of the week, so...
I can break into my local library and sneak around. I won't do that,
there you go, yeah.
but I can't swing from webs as far as I know. That's the main difference.
That's why we're here and we want to play Spider-Man.
Yeah. I waited this long not to play as MJ, unfortunately. Maybe one day there will be an MJ game as good as Spider-Man.
MJ spin-off game coming 2020.
That's the next DLC, guys.
Oh,
Look
no.
forward to it.
Oh, no. All right, so that is all the time we have today. Thank you again so much for talking to me about the game today. And if you haven't already, go make sure to watch his review. It's seriously amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching MojoPlays. We'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.